Well, it's the cover up, of course, that gets you, not often the original crime. And the issue here is that Donald Trump's name is in those files. We know it's in the files. There's no question about that. Whether or not he committed any crimes, we don't know that because we don't have the files. So why is the speaker working so hard to make sure the files aren't released? Why hasn't the Trump Justice Department, which has absolute freedom here to release these files, released them? Why is the House committee calling in witnesses that have no probative value from their testimony, like former Attorney General Bill Barr? And it's because they need to keep these files out of the public eye.
David Cay Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, and, of course, an author of an array of books on Donald Trump. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report again.
Glad to be with you again.
David, I want to start off with the fact that this week, House Speaker Mike Johnson, he was questioned about the fact that newly elected Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva has not been sworn in. Now, this is quite bizarre that she hasn't been sworn in yet. Several Democrats have even marched outside of Johnston's suite on Tuesday demanding that he swear her in. In conjunction with this, Attorney General Chris Mays from Arizona, which is, of course, this newly elected Congresswoman is from Arizona, wrote a letter to the House Speaker threatening legal action for violating the Constitution in delaying her being sworn in. So, David, can we firmly say right now that the only reason why Speaker Johnson is delaying this is because Adelita Grijalva is the 218th signature on this discharge petition to force a vote to release these Epstein files?
Absolutely, that's what's going on here. Speaker Johnson swore in several Republicans before the elections were certified because the numbers were so big, it was obvious they had won. But he's not doing that with the new Congresswoman from Arizona who succeeded her father in this office. When she is sworn in, there will be the minimum 218 votes for a discharge petition, which means that within a week, the Epstein files will have to be made public. And that's clearly the concern of the speaker. Somehow trying to stop this. Interestingly, the speaker was asked in relation to all of these matters about what he's doing while the U.S. government is shut down, so what's your strategy? And he said, I don't have a strategy. But he does on this issue try to hold off as long as you can this discharge petition.
So when you're looking at the situation, David, can you see no other reason as to why he would delay swearing her in?
No, there's absolutely no other reason. The Republicans are the majority in the House. He will continue to be Speaker. And so the only issue here is that she has pledged, along with 4 Republicans, to sign the discharge petition. And as soon as she's sworn in, the discharge petition becomes active and the clock starts running.
And so if you kind of relate it back to a normal circumstance, this is quite unprecedented to have such a delay.
Yes, I can't think in my lifetime of a speaker who would not swear in a member who was duly elected. There have been some controversies about, is there something wrong with the election? Do we need to have a recount because the vote margin is in 2 digits? And congressional districts have about 500,000 people. So if you're under 100 votes, I can see where you would legitimately question the outcome of the election. But she won something approaching 2/3 of the vote, or in the general neighborhood, 2/3 of the vote.
Johnson was asked by reporters about this. He denied that there was a link between Adelita Grijalva being sworn in and the Epstein files. He said that everyone in Congress is for maximum transparency, but they're all about protecting victims that have not come forward and that these names need to be redacted. He also said that Democrats had the files in their possession for 4 years under the Biden administration and did nothing. So that's what he said. And then Thomas Massie, a fellow Republican who's kind of leading the charge for this discharge petition, tweeted this and said, today Speaker Johnson seemed to acknowledge something that the FBI director hasn't. It wasn't just Epstein trafficking women, yet he persists in the cover-up. The effort he supports hasn't released a single name, yet we know at least 20 men are implicated in this file. So just for context for our audience, at that FBI hearing, I think it was this month or late last month with Kash Patel, Massie spoke about how that they know from victim testimony that the FBI that there is around 20 men allegedly implicated in these files. They named one, but then they kind of described the 19 others. So, David, what is your reaction to this? Not just you've seen Thomas Massie, of course, call out his own House Speaker, but just, I guess, the cover-up going on.
Well, it's the cover-up, of course, that gets you, not often the original crime. And the issue here is that Donald Trump's name is in those files. We know it's in the files. There's no question about that. Whether or not he committed any crimes, we don't know that because we don't have the files. So why is the speaker working so hard to make sure the files aren't released? Why hasn't the Trump Justice Department, which has absolute freedom here to release these files, released them? Why is the House committee calling in witnesses that have no probative value from their testimony, like former Attorney General Bill Barr? And it's because they need to keep these files out of the public eye. Now, as soon as the new Congresswoman is sworn in, the ball game here is going to change. And Trump is already beginning to see some of his most MAGA-oriented members of his party pull apart from him. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, has separated from him on the issue that's causing the government shutdown, the refusal by the Republicans to extend tax credits, and that would result in about 17 million Americans losing their health care. We don't have universal health care, unlike the United Kingdom. So the absolute issue here is protecting Donald Trump from whatever is in those files.
But David, this situation, the lengths that Speaker Johnston is going, as well as whoever else in the Republican Party and Trump administration that are working so hard to avoid this release, is it not backfiring? Is it not making them look guilty?
It certainly, you have to ask the question, since Donald Trump himself said he was going to see to it that the files were released, why this complete change? Pam Bondi said, I have them on my desk, and now she's backpedaled over this. And it's all because Kash Patel assigned 1,000 FBI agents to go through these files and flag every reference to Donald Trump. And we don't know how many references there were, but think about all the law enforcement effort that was diverted from everything from bank robbery to counterterrorism to look for Donald Trump's name in these files. Now, there should be a copy of these files in the possession of the estate of Jeffrey Epstein. And one of the mysteries is, why aren't the Democrats asking the estate to turn over its copy of the files? Normally, when you have a law enforcement raid in the United States, they take, your computers, your paper records, whatever it is that they're authorized to take. They then have to give them back to you or give you back copies that they certify are true and correct copies. So the estate should have copies of this. And if it doesn't, the estate has a right to demand them. But all of this is about keeping those files closed to public sight. And yes, they're beginning to lose members. Congressman Massey, who we just talked about, he represents Northern Kentucky district right across from Cincinnati, Ohio. He just had record fundraising. He raised over $250,000 in 3 months. There is a MAGA group called MAGA Kentucky that has spent $2 million trying to remove this Republican from office because he won't bend the knee to Donald on every issue.
It is an interesting situation. We'll keep an eye on that, David, but I want to move on to something else happening. Most US leading news organizations have not signed this Pentagon policy that is restricting journalists' access and ability to gather unauthorized material and information, even if it's unclassified. Also restricts their ability to kind of roam around the halls of the Pentagon. If these rules are broken, press credentials will also be revoked. So far, only one news organization, One American News, has signed the policy. The deadline was Tuesday. So yesterday, everyone else is saying, absolutely not, I'm not signing that. So looking at the situation, thinking that this is a middle finger being put up against Donald Trump from the press.
Well, I think it's significant that Rupert Murdoch's Fox wouldn't sign this agreement. And of course, Pete Hegseth used to be one of the weekend anchors at Fox. No legitimate news organization is going to go along with this. And I don't look upon One American News as a news organization. It's a propaganda outfit. The way the statement is written you can't, for example, stop a captain in the hallway or stop by his office and say, what do you think about XYZ? The contention of the spokesman for the Pentagon is that reporters are soliciting criminal activity by military officers. Well, that suggests Pete Hegseth doesn't trust the officers in the U.S. military. But no legitimate organization is going along with this. Now, at DC Report, the news service that I founded when Trump first term began, we had a motto. We still do. Covering what politicians do, not just what they say. So you can cover the Pentagon without being there. I have broken over the last 50 years many, many major Washington stories with never being in a Washington bureau. The Pentagon has to produce enormous amounts of paperwork. There are audits, there are contract reports, there's all sorts of material. And so if you can't get into the Pentagon, cover it in a different way. And there'll be terrific stories about what's going on with this roughly $1 trillion a year organization.
So you think Pentagon reporters are just going to ignore Pete Hegseth?
Well, I think that they've now lost their access to the building. They don't have a pass that'll let them go through the gates, so they would have to get special requests to come in at any time. And I think that if they're smart about it, if they cover what the Pentagon is doing rather than what the Pentagon says, we'll get better quality news coverage.
Moving on to kind of Trump and Russia and Ukraine, David, Trump spoke about sending weapons, especially these Tomahawk missiles, to Ukraine ahead of his meeting on Friday with President Zelensky. He said, I might tell him, referring to Putin, if the war is not settled, we may very well do it, referring to sending these Tomahawk missiles. We may not, but we may do it. Do they want to have Tomahawks going in their direction? I don't think so. So, David, what is with this will they or won't they angle that Donald Trump is playing out when it comes to supplying Ukraine with these missiles? We can clearly see that Putin and the Kremlin are frustrated and are threatened by these missiles. They've threatened further escalation if the US were to send them to Ukraine. So shouldn't this be incentive to do so, knowing that it rattles Putin so much?
And I don't see any way for Putin to back down from what he's done at this point. Even though he's a dictator, dictators still have to have some degree of popular support and support among the elite in a country to maintain their position. And Putin has put himself in a place where I can't see him backing down, even if he has to burn the country down for it. All of this traces back to a really serious error by Joe Biden. We knew months in advance that Russia was going to invade. Biden released raw intelligence information, which I've never seen a president do before. But instead of saying to Putin, you put one foot inside Ukraine and we will unleash everything necessary to push your soldiers back, he went through these incremental movements, which is what Trump has been doing. I'm going to do this and then I'll do that. That has just extended unnecessarily this horrible war of aggression by Russia. And whether or not Tomahawk missiles are turned over to the Ukrainians, and they are very lethal and precise weapons, that's not going to stop Putin. After all, Putin has now got a deal for a pipeline into China that will continue to supply him with money by selling natural gas from the Arctic Circle. He's continuing to be able to sell to India, and India is in this bizarre position of taking Russian oil and selling refined product to the United States. There are about 200 tankers going back and forth doing that. And at the same time, he's the biggest supplier of diesel to Ukraine. India is. So this is just another blip development, a little spike in what's going on here. The answer to this is that there has to be a very unified front by the US and Europe, by NATO. And you're in London. I'd be very worried about this because Putin has been doing aggressive actions, overflights of Poland and the Baltic states, and other actions with military jets that are designed to test the resolve of NATO to Putin's clear plans to, if he can vanquish Ukraine, to move on and rebuild the old Soviet Union's satellite system. He already has Georgia and Chechnya under his thumb. And there's every indication that that's exactly what he will keep doing, and his closest successors would keep doing if he isn't stopped now.
Trump, he also told reporters that he's disappointed in Putin. He said, Vladimir and I had a very good relationship, probably still do. I don't know why he continues with this war. This war has been so bad for him. I'd like to see him do well. I mean, I had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin, but he doesn't want the war to end. And I think it's making him look very bad. He could end it quickly. And you know that they have long lines waiting for gasoline in Russia right now. And all of a sudden his economy is going to collapse. So, Professor, do you think that Trump is still optimistic right now that Vladimir Putin is willing to negotiate? And I don't mean negotiate where he uses it as a tactic to stall time, but actually negotiate to end this war with the mediation of Donald Trump, because it has been made quite clear by now, and we thought this especially after, Trump's speech at the UN General Assembly, that Putin's intentions are clear and that the next steps for the United States, for NATO, for EU is to actually help Ukraine win, as opposed to try and get Putin to come back to the negotiating table.
Well, the way Donald sees the world, and I've known him for almost 40 years, is that if you're doing what he wants, you're his friend. And if you're not moving it along, then you're somewhere on the road between opponent to outright enemy. And this idea that personal relationship with Putin is going to have some effect is just naive. And let's remember, Donald Trump never did a day of public service before he was sworn in the first time as president. Not one day, no blue ribbon commissions even, nothing. So he has no knowledge of how these things work. But there's no reason in the world that Putin is going to be concerned about his image versus Trump's concern, because Trump had said, I don't even need to be sworn in the second time. As soon as I win the election, I'll settle this in one day. Well, we're coming up on a year since the election, and guess what? He hasn't gotten anywhere. So Donald is very troubled by this. He recognizes it makes him look ineffective and weak, which he is. And Putin has no reason to move from what he is doing, which is part of his whole fundamental scheme. He's talked about back to the turn of the century of the worst geopolitical event of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union and its satellites, that whole system, which is an astonishing view for people who live outside of those countries about, what was the biggest, most important event. And I don't think that's it.
A White House official said, David, that the president remains optimistic that he will be able to get both sides to stop this senseless killing. And these were comments following the hostage release deal being brokered between Hamas and Israel. Will this situation in the Middle East, or just the first phase of this happening over the weekend and early the start of this week, do you think it will motivate Donald Trump to help Ukraine and Russia end this war?
Well, let me say first, as one of Donald's longest and most severe critics, he deserves applause for getting the hostages returned. It's probably the most significant achievement he's had so far that's positive. He has lots of negative ones, but let's give him credit for doing that. So Trump needs to be able to demonstrate to his followers that he really can do the things he claims, these magical powers to end wars. And so, yes, what's going on in Gaza is going to influence how he thinks about dealing with Putin. He's going to be more bellicose, as in the threat of Tomahawk missiles. There's a lot more the U.S. could do if he was serious about that and acted more quickly. And by the way, don't miss that already, just a day later, we're beginning to see cracks in what Trump said was going to be a golden new era in the Middle East. And already we're seeing that's not the case. He successfully got hostages swapped, but that is not, beyond that, nothing was achieved.
Just finally, David, Donald Trump and Zelensky, they'll meet on Friday, as I mentioned. Do you have any predictions for how this meeting will go? Do you think Zelensky will get as much out of it as he hopes for? Do we think that Donald Trump will, so to speak, behave with the Ukrainian leader?
Well, the thing to watch for is, does Zelensky butter up Donald? The thing about negotiating with Donald, and I've negotiated with him many, many times, is that if you just tell him how great and wonderful and powerful he is, he becomes putty in your hands, and he sometimes makes bad deals, as I've documented in the past. So that's the number one thing to watch for. Zelensky has an opportunity here to get more help from Donald Trump and more to trouble Putin. He also can blow it if he doesn't kowtow to Donald and show his obsequious approval of Donald.
David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you, Maddie.